May 31st, wickedly hot today here in southern Ontario. Seems like a good time for story time. A lengthy story, and let me start by saying I don't want to aggravate any Americans or anyone at n.a.s.a. The story isn't intended to slag either the Americans or n.a.s.a. It's a story of man's folly and arrogance. And if I'm a little vague on some details, forgive me. It's been decades since I read this book, and I don't know where or what it was entitled. It just stuck in my mind. The space race between the USSR and the US of A. When I was, in primary school, they'd pull the curtains and we'd see these black and white NASA Apollo mission films on the Chickadee's 16 mil films there. John F. Kennedy had said in the race to space they would set a man on the moon before the end of the decade. And indeed they did. Was it Neil Armstrong was the first one to set a boot upon the solar or the lunar dust there? He kind of flubbed his line. But that's neither here nor there. The Russians won the first round, so to speak. They put a wee doggy into space to orbit the Earth. I forget the wee doggy's name, and the dog didn't make it back alive, but the Russians hadn't intended him to, and therefore the mission was considered a success. They won round one with the Americans. The Americans, of course, said, "Hold my beer, we got to top that." So their plan was to send a chimpanzee into orbit, and I assume orbit more times and longer, whatever. Show up those pesky Ruskies, So they rounded up, or we could say abducted, 3,000 chimpanzees. And, they enslaved them. And, they tortured them. But, it was called training. Now, I don't think the folks at n.a.s.a. were surprised. Quite a disparity in the intelligent level of the chimpanzees, as there is with humans and all other animals as we perceive and measure it. But they were having a little trouble finding a chimpanzee who was kind of up for the task. They had to, lights would flash, they'd have to press buttons and flick switches and pull levers. I don't know why they were needed. You would think it could all be automated, but apparently it wasn't. Then they found, whoa, there, big ugly spider. A chimpanzee they named Thor. He was like a simian genius, a Darwinian anomaly on the evolutionary sense. He was an Einstein. He had no problem with the buttons and the switches and the levers, So the folks at n.a.s.a. were elated. They had Thor. They had their man, so to speak. And then Thor decided he didn't want to play. I guess he didn't understand the importance of, showing up the Russians. He went on strike. So they upped his, the amperage and the frequency and stuff. And Thor was a tough little nut. He said, I just don't want to play. So they folded him up and stuffed him in a box. It was like about, 2 cubic inches bigger than he was. They left him in there for 2 days. They pulled him out and folded the kinks out of him, and he said, okay, if you insist. So Thor played for a while. The boys at n.a.s.a. were happy, and then Thor went on strike again. He said, no, this abducted, enslaved, and tortured thing, no, I'm not going to play anymore. So they folded him back up again, took the toilet plunger, stuffed him back into the box for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Imagine that would kill a man. I don't know if they had to do some physical therapy and chiropractic work on him when they folded him out of the box again, but Thor went willingly back to the lights and the buttons and the switches and stuff. They didn't want any more part of that box. So one sunny day at Cape Canaveral there, they flung Thor out into space, and I don't know how many times they went around, how long the mission was. Everything was groovy, you know. And then during the re-entry, as I remember correctly, that was a difficult and trying period in that time. So Thor's doing his thing with the lights, the buttons, and the switches, and it goes sideways. It goes bad. Thor starts getting zapped, despite the fact he's doing everything correctly. Now NASA is aware of this, but they can't correct it. So all the way during the re-entry thing, Thor's doing his thing. He's getting zapped, and they can't stop it. Now I don't recall how long the re-entry level thing was. If you remember the footage, you know, the little command module floating down on a parachute there into the swells of the South Pacific. Excuse me. Think of, you know, I Dream of Jeannie. Remember that old show? Barbara Eden. Anyways, Thor's getting zapped all the way down, and the command module lands. It's corking about in the Pacific there, the South Pacific. He's still getting zapped. So he tears his way out of his little chimpanzee-sized helmet and suit, and the chimpanzee-proof restraints holding him in his little command module chair there, and proceeds to go about vigorously redecorating the interior of the command module. Thor wasn't happy. It'd be an understatement. But Thor, still enraged, then tears his way out through the, again, supposedly chimpanzee-proof hatch. He's waiting for the boys in the Navy to steam up, you know, with the cameras and everything. If you look carefully in the footage of that Apollo mission, what number it was, I can't recall, you'll see the mangled escape hatch hanging, you know, crookedly battered up there. No sign of Thor. Well, that's because no less than 6 Navy members unloaded their revolvers into Thor, because he wasn't really going to be appeased with a n.a.s.a. grievance form, you know what I mean? He really wasn't into some, you know, anger management counseling or something. So yeah, Thor, suitably weighted down, sunk into the briny depths, and Thor was no more. I did say it was a sad story, right? Well, the press and NASA and the public thought, you know, great, they'd showed up the Russians. The mission was successful. They'd outgunned the Russians, so to speak. And the chimpanzee did make it back alive through the re-entry level. They just forgot to mention the rest of it. And they never did mention Thor's name. It was always a chimpanzee. So I think Thor deserves to be remembered in history. Salute to you, my simian cousin. You went down swinging, dude. Your name should not be forgotten.